While my husband smiled watching our daughter leave for his mother's ranch, I didn't know she carried a monstrous secret in her womb. 5 winters, 5 pregnancies, 5 children I never knew existed. The man who slept beside me had turned our only daughter into a factory for heirs. Hello, my dear friends. What an immense joy to be able to talk with you today. I'm Willa Mae Blackwood, 72 years old, born in Bristol, Virginia, in the heart of Appalachia. But today I live here in Shenandoah Valley, where I found my peace after so much turmoil. Here the mountains embrace me every morning when I open my windows, and the river that flows through town seems to tell me stories of perseverance with its constant current. Today, my day starts bright and early, you know. At 5 in the morning, I'm already up, brewing my coffee the old-fashioned way my mother taught me. Then, I go to my porch, where I have my plants. Oh, my orchids and ferns are my pride and joy. I spend time there, watering each one, talking to them as if they were my companions. And they truly are. Each flower that blooms is like a new beginning, a new chance that life gives us. After lunch, I always dedicate some time to crochet. My hands aren't as steady as they used to be, but they can still create beautiful doilies and quilts. I started crocheting during my most difficult time, when I needed to occupy my mind with something beautiful while my heart was bleeding inside. It was my therapy, you know, and today it's become my pleasure. I sell some pieces at our town's Saturday market, and the money helps me buy little gifts for my great-grandchildren when they come to visit. In the late afternoon, when the sun isn't so strong, I like to walk to the town square. There I meet my friends, other ladies who, like me, carry stories in their eyes. We talk, laugh, sometimes cry together, and that's how we share life's burdens. Miss Clara, my oldest friend here, always says we're like a flock of birds that, together, build a stronger nest. Sundays are visiting days. My house fills with people, noise, life. My daughter comes with her children and grandchildren, bringing sweets and stories from the week. That's when I prepare that fried chicken and buttermilk biscuits they love so much, a recipe I inherited from my grandmother, but only shared with my daughter after we reconnected. Each bite is a little piece of love I offer them. Oh, my dears watching me now. Before I continue, I'd like to ask you to leave your like on this video and subscribe to the Grandparents' Tales channel. It helps me so much to continue sharing my stories with you, and tell me in the comments what little town are you watching from, and what time of day did this video appear for you. Was it early morning with coffee, or perhaps after lunch while you're taking a little rest, or maybe in the evening before bed? I always read all the comments, and I'm so touched to know where these kind souls come from, who take time out of their day to listen to this old grandma here. Tell me, won't you? Let's create a chain of caring that crosses this entire country. Today, I want to tell you a story that I've kept in my heart for a long time. A story about broken trust, about eyes that didn't want to see, and about how even the people closest to us can hide terrible secrets behind smiles. It's the story of my only daughter, Melissa, and how I discovered that the trips she took every winter hid a truth that would change our lives forever. But to understand this story, I need to go back to the beginning, when I was just a dreamy girl in the mountains of Bristol, believing that love would be enough to protect me from any storm. I was born in 1953 in Bristol, that beautiful little town nestled in the Appalachian Mountains of Virginia. My father, Joseph Blackwood, was a hard-working man who mined coal in the Blue Ridge Mountains. He wasn't rich, but he was honest and respected by everyone. My mother, Dorothy Mae Blackwood, was a woman with blessed hands who sewed for the wealthier families in the region. Her fingers were always marked by the needle, but I never heard her complain about it. Each little mark is a piece of bread on the table, she would say with that smile that lit up our simple home. We were 5 siblings. I was the youngest, coming after Robert, Ellie, George, and Loretta. Our house was small, with wooden floors that creaked and a tin roof that, when it rained hard, would let in some leaks that became our game. We would put little buckets to catch the water and bet which one would fill up first. In the yard, We had an apple tree that was our joy when it bore fruit. My father was proud of that tree, said it was older than the town itself. The mornings began with the crowing of Sultan, an arrogant rooster that my mother insisted on keeping because he tells the time better than any clock. Before sunrise, Mama was already up, lighting the wood stove to make the cornbread that would sustain us throughout the day. The smell of that fire mixed with fresh coffee is a memory I treasure. My brothers and sisters and I shared the chores. While Robert and George helped my father in the mines, Ellie and Loretta helped Mama with the sewing, learning the trade. Being the youngest, I was in charge of fetching water from the town pump, 3 times a day, with a bucket that, when full, weighed almost as much as I did. That's how I developed this straight posture I maintain to this day, you see? Carrying weight on your head since childhood teaches you to walk like a queen. At school, which was almost an hour's walk from our house, I was diligent. Miss Hattie said I had a gift for letters. I remember my little notebook was always the neatest in the class because I saved every bit of paper. When there was no more space in the margins, I would write between the lines already written, with tiny handwriting that only I could read. My dream was to be a teacher, but in those days, for a poor girl from Bristol, dreaming was a luxury that cost dearly. The games of my childhood were simple, but full of joy. We played Ring Around the Rosie in the light of the oil lamp when night fell. Ring Around the Rosie and London Bridge were our favorite songs. On Sundays after church, my father would take us swimming in the river where the water was still clean before reaching the mining areas. That's where I learned to swim, thrown into the water without warning by my brother Robert, who then laughed so hard at my startled face that I ended up laughing too, even with water up to my nose. We also had the 4th of July celebrations. Oh, that was a joy. The whole town would decorate, and my mother would spend weeks sewing our new dresses for the occasion. Mine was always made with scraps from the clothes she sewed for the ladies, so I ended up with the most colorful and beautiful dress in the parade, at least in my child's eyes. My closest friends were Hazel and Tommy, the children of Mr. Abernathy, who owned the store where we bought on credit when money didn't last until the end of the month. Hazel had hair so curly it stood on end, and Tommy always had scraped knees from climbing trees so much. We played hide-and-seek among the ruins of the old houses in town, imagining we were explorers of hidden treasures, like the ones my father sought in the mines. But not everything was roses in my childhood. When I was 9, the great flood came that took half our house. We lost almost everything, and for a few months we had to live in the church hall with other affected families. It was a difficult time, but it taught me the value of community. Neighbors helped each other, shared what little they had. Mr. Olympia, the baker, would bring bread he hadn't sold that day. Mrs. Mitchell taught Sunday school to distract us, and even Dr. Wilson, the town doctor, would visit us without charging anything. It was there, seeing that solidarity, that I learned that wealth isn't always in what we have, but in what we are to each other. When I turned 12, my father managed to save enough money to rebuild our house, this time with proper wood. It was a moment of great pride for the family. I remember the day of the housewarming, which is what we called the first night we slept there. Mama made a special corn pudding, and we invited everyone who had helped us during that difficult time. It was a simple celebration, but full of gratitude. It was around that same time that I noticed something strange happening with my sister Loretta, who was then 17. She began meeting secretly with Paul, the mayor's son, a boy who, in the eyes of the town, was too rich for a coal miner's daughter. I saw my sister cry many nights, hidden behind the house. When I asked what was happening, she just hugged me tight and said, "Never trust promises that are too pretty, Willa May. Men who promise a lot usually deliver little." I didn't understand at the time what she meant, but those words stayed with me, like a seed that would germinate years later, when I found myself caught in a web of lies woven by someone I loved and trusted blindly. My adolescence approached with the same speed that Bristol was growing. The mines weren't yielding as much coal, and many families, including some of my friends, began moving to larger cities in search of work. I was afraid our turn would come to leave, because I loved every stone of that town, every bend in the river, every sound of the church bells that marked the hours of our day. It was in this time of changes and uncertainties that I began to dream of a different future, one where I could study, have a profession, be independent. I had no idea yet that fate would lead me down paths so different from what I had planned, nor that I would find love in the most unexpected way, with someone who would come into my life like a prince, but who harbored shadows within that I could never have imagined. When I turned 18 in 1971, I received a used sewing machine as a gift from my mother. It wasn't new, had its scratches and marks of time, but to me it was a treasure. "Now you can start sewing your own stories," she said, with those eyes that always seemed to know more than they revealed. I had been helping with the sewing for years, but having my own machine meant independence, meant possible dreams. It was with this machine that I began sewing for others, helping to supplement the family income that was diminishing as the mining became less prosperous. My father wasn't finding as much coal, and his calloused hands seemed increasingly tired when he came home at the end of the day. One afternoon, I received a special order. A lady from Richmond who was visiting relatives in Bristol needed urgent alterations on a dress for a wedding. Her usual seamstress had fallen ill, and someone had given her my name. I remember trembling with nervousness because the fabric was fine, delicate, different from the simple cottons I was used to working with. But I accepted the challenge. I worked for 2 days and 2 nights on that dress, measuring each stitch, adjusting every detail. When the lady tried it on, her eyes sparkled. "Girl, you have a gift," she said, and then made me a proposal that would change my life. She invited me to work in her atelier in Richmond. My mother cried when I told her, not from sadness, but from a mixture of pride and fear. Life in the big city is different, my daughter. People there don't look each other in the eye like they do here. My father, always more quiet, just nodded and said, "Go, but never forget where you came from." So, with a cardboard suitcase containing 2 changes of clothes, my sewing scissors, and many dreams, I boarded the bus to Richmond. The journey took almost a full day, on roads that shook the bus as if trying to make us give up before arriving. I looked out the window watching my Bristol fade into the distance, feeling a tightness in my chest, but also a new hope. Richmond swallowed me like a giant wave. The buildings, the cars, the number of people, everything left me stunned. Mrs. Eulalia's atelier, the lady with the dress, was in a neighborhood called The Fan. It was an old house, 2 stories, with a discreet sign on the door. Inside, 5 other young women worked at aligned machines, creating dresses for the city's socialites. Mrs. Eulalia gave me a small room in the back of the house, small but clean, and taught me the secrets of haute couture. I learned to work with silks, laces, delicate embroideries. My hands, which before only knew rough cotton, now danced among fine fabrics imported from Europe. It was in this atelier that I met Lawrence. He was the son of an important client, Mrs. Sylvia, a widow who lived in a mansion in Windsor Farms. Lawrence appeared one day to pick up his mother's dress. Tall, with green eyes that seemed to penetrate one's soul, he had a smooth, educated way of speaking, so different from the boys of Bristol. When he saw me sewing, he stopped and watched. "Your hands seem to know exactly what to do, as if the fabric speaks to them," he said. I felt my face heat up with embarrassment, but also with a new feeling I couldn't name. He asked to see me again, and Mrs. Eulalia, who seemed delighted with the idea of one of her seamstresses attracting the interest of someone from such a distinguished family, gave permission. Our courtship began like that, among scraps of fine fabrics and hidden glances. Lawrence would take me for walks on Sundays in Capitol Square, showed me places I never imagined I'd know. He was studying law and talked about things that to me sounded like another language: politics, philosophy, art. I felt small next to him, but he had a way of making me feel special, as if my simplicity was something precious. Mrs. Sylvia, his mother, didn't approve of our relationship at first. A little seamstress from the country? I heard her say once, when she thought I couldn't hear. But Lawrence confronted her, saying he loved me and wouldn't give me up. That seemed so brave to me, so romantic. After a year of dating, he proposed to me. I remember the ring, simple but beautiful, that he placed on my finger. Let's build a life together, Willamay, a beautiful family. I was 20 years old and thought I knew love. How wrong I was, my God. We married in a simple ceremony in Richmond. My parents came, bringing in their suitcase their best wishes and the little they could offer us, a set of sheets embroidered by my mother. Lawrence's parents gave us as a gift a small but well-located apartment near his law school. In the first years, I was very happy. I continued working with Mrs. Eulalia, while Lawrence finished his studies. Our apartment was our little refuge, where I tried to reproduce the warmth of my home in Bristol, with plants in the windows and the smell of Southern cooking on the stove. When Lawrence graduated, things began to change. He got a job at an important law firm, and his mother, Mrs. Sylvia, began to appear more in our lives. She always brought gifts, always gave advice, always seemed to be evaluating if I was good enough for her son. It was at her insistence that I stopped working when I became pregnant. A mother should dedicate herself to the home, she would say, and Lawrence agreed. I don't want my wife to need to work. At the time, that sounded like care, like love. Today I know it was the beginning of control. Our daughter Melissa was born in 1975, a beautiful girl with her father's green eyes and my dark hair. When I held her in my arms for the first time, I felt a love I didn't know was possible. I swore to myself that she would have all the opportunities I didn't have, that she would never need to carry water buckets on her head or work from childhood. Lawrence was a proud father, showing the girl to everyone, taking pictures all the time. But who really seemed obsessed with Melissa was Mrs. Sylvia. She visited almost daily, brought clothes, toys, and always insisted on holding her granddaughter, sometimes for hours, barely letting me nurse her. She has the Mercer blood, Mrs. Sylvia would say, referring to her own family. She'll be a fine, educated young lady, not like these girls today. The way she spoke, as if Melissa was her property, bothered me, but I swallowed that feeling. After all, she was the grandmother, and Lawrence was happy seeing his mother so involved with our daughter. When Melissa turned 3, Mrs. Sylvia made us a proposal. She had a secluded ranch in a rural area near Charlottesville. A beautiful place, with clean air, away from this city pollution. Perfect for a child to grow up strong and healthy. She suggested that Melissa spend time there, especially during the winter, when the girl's bronchitis, which was rare actually, could worsen in the city. Lawrence loved the idea. Mother, you always think of everything. It would be wonderful for Melissa. I hesitated. 3 years was very young to be away from her parents. But the ranch was really beautiful. We had visited a few times, and Mrs. Sylvia assured us she would hire a trusted nanny to help her care for the girl. It will only be 2 weeks, Willamay, said Lawrence, and you can take some time to rest. I gave in, won over by the arguments and the desire to be a good wife, to not cause unnecessary conflicts. Those first 2 weeks turned into a month. When Melissa returned, she was quieter, paler. It's homesickness, explained Mrs. Sylvia. But it will pass soon. Children adapt quickly. I noticed that my daughter would wake up at night with nightmares, but Lawrence minimized it. They're just dreams, love. All children have them. The following winter, when Melissa was 4, the story repeated itself. This time it was 2 months at the ranch. It's good for her to create bonds with nature, justified Mrs. Sylvia. Besides, I'm teaching her to read. She's so intelligent, learns everything so quickly. Again, Melissa returned different. Thinner, with dark circles under her eyes, and something in her eyes had changed, a childlike sparkle that seemed to have gone out. When I asked if everything was okay, if she had liked the ranch, she just nodded silently without looking me in the eyes. I began to question Lawrence about these long stays. I miss her. 2 months is a long time. But he always had ready answers. My mother is elderly, Willa May. Having her granddaughter nearby makes her happy. You don't want to take that away from her, do you? Besides, at the ranch, Melissa can run, play outdoors, not be cooped up in this apartment. So, year after year, winter after winter, visits to the ranch became a tradition in our family. As Melissa grew, the periods away from home increased. 3 months became the standard when she entered adolescence. It's the school vacation period, Lawrence justified, and the ranch has private tutors that my mother hired. She won't miss any content. What broke my heart was seeing how Melissa returned from these stays, always more withdrawn, always sadder. At 14, I noticed she had developed a habit of biting her nails until they bled. At 15, she began having crying spells for no apparent reason. I tried to talk to her several times. Honey, is something happening at the ranch? Something you want to tell me? But Melissa would just shake her head. It's nothing, Mom. I'm just tired. Other times she would respond with anger. If you really cared, you wouldn't send me there every year. That accusation hurt me deeply. I wasn't sending her anywhere. Or was I? I began to question whether I should have been firmer, whether I should have imposed limits on Mrs. Sylvia and Lawrence. But how? Lawrence had become the main attorney at the firm. He was the one who supported the house, made the important decisions. I, who had left work to care for the family, felt increasingly dependent, increasingly less able to assert my opinion. One day, I found Melissa crying in the bathroom. She was 16 and was preparing for another season at the ranch. When I entered, she quickly wiped away her tears, but I hugged her and didn't let go. Please, Mom, she whispered against my shoulder. I don't want to go this time. I felt my heart tighten. You don't have to go if you don't want to, honey. I'll talk to your father. The discussion with Lawrence was the worst we'd ever had. He was furious when I said Melissa would not go to the ranch that winter. You're spoiling her, he shouted. My mother prepared everything, hired teachers, bought new books. She's unhappy, Lawrence. Don't you see that? Every time she comes back from the ranch, she's worse. He looked at me with a coldness I had never seen before. You don't understand anything, Willa May. That's why you stopped working, remember? Because you don't have enough education to understand what's best for our daughter. Those words hit me like a slap, but I maintained my position. Melissa is not going, and that's final. The next morning, I woke up and found the house empty. A note from Lawrence on the kitchen table said only, "Took Melissa to the ranch. We'll be back in August." He had taken our daughter while I slept. That was the worst winter of my life. For 3 months, I lived in a limbo of despair and powerlessness. I tried to visit the ranch several times, but Lawrence had given instructions to the caretaker, Mr. Theodore, not to let me in. Doctor's orders, he would say, without looking me in the eyes. I even slept in the car, parked on the dirt road that led to the property, hoping to see my daughter, even if from afar. But the ranch was large, isolated, surrounded by a dense forest that made it almost a fortress. I called the ranch every day. The few times I managed to speak with Melissa, the conversation was short, monitored. "I'm fine, Mom," she would say, in a monotone voice that didn't sound like hers. In the background, I would always hear someone breathing, listening, probably Mrs. Sylvia. At home, alone, I rummaged through drawers and closets, trying to understand what was happening. What power did Mrs. Sylvia have over Lawrence to make him act that way? Why that obsession with Melissa's stays at the ranch? I found bank statements showing regular transfers to accounts I was unaware of, always after the periods when Melissa returned from the ranch. When I questioned Lawrence by phone, he said they were investments for our daughter's future. That winter, overcome with anguish, I sought help. First, I went to the police. The sheriff, a middle-aged man with a bored expression, listened to me and said, "Ma'am, if the father took the daughter to her grandmother's house, there's no crime. It's a family matter. Resolve it with your husband." I left there feeling even more alone. I then tried to talk to a lawyer, but in a city like Richmond, The Mercer name opened doors, and closed them too. 3 law firms refused to see me when I mentioned who I wanted to act against. "We can't antagonize Mr. Lawrence Mercer," they said, with variations of the same phrase. Finally, I found a newly graduated lawyer, Ms. Irene, who agreed to listen to me. She was frank. "Mrs. Mercer, without concrete evidence of mistreatment, it will be difficult to get a court order to bring your daughter back. The judge will probably see this as a marital disagreement." I returned home, even more desperate. That night, I had a vivid dream of my sister Loretta, recalling her words, "Never trust promises that are too pretty." I woke up with a renewed determination. If the system couldn't help me, I would find another way. I started working with sewing again at home to save some money. I reconnected with old clients of Mrs. Eulalia who had retired. I worked day and night, sleeping only when necessary. Every penny I earned, I saved, preparing myself for whatever came next. In August, as promised, Lawrence brought Melissa back. The shock I felt upon seeing her still hurts in my chest when I remember. My girl, who had left at 16, her face still round with youth, returned unrecognizable. Thin to the point where bones showed under her pale skin, deep dark circles, empty eyes. Her adolescent body seemed to have aged years in just 3 months. I ran to hug her, but she backed away, as if my touch could hurt her. That gesture broke something inside me. My own daughter was afraid of my touch. "What did they do to you?" I whispered, tears flowing uncontrollably. Lawrence intervened abruptly. "Nothing happened, Willa May. She's just tired from the trip, and she caught a cold at the end of the season." But it wasn't a cold. I knew, with that instinct that only a mother has. Something much more serious had happened to my daughter. In the days that followed, I tried to get closer to Melissa. I would bring teas to her room, sit silently beside her bed while she pretended to sleep. Sometimes I would hum softly those nursery rhymes from my childhood in Bristol, hoping to awaken some good memory, some feeling of security. One night, I heard sobs coming from her room. I entered without knocking and found her sitting on the bathroom floor, hugging her knees, trembling like a leaf in the wind. I sat beside her, saying nothing, just being present. After a long silence, she rested her head on my shoulder, a small gesture that meant everything to me. "Every winter it's the same thing, Mom," she finally spoke, her voice almost inaudible. "Each time it gets worse." "What happens there, honey?" I asked, holding her cold hand between mine. "You can tell me. I'm here to protect you." She laughed, a bitter sound that didn't belong to a 16-year-old girl. "You can't protect me. No one can." That same week, I found Melissa vomiting in the bathroom early in the morning. My heart raced with a terrible fear. When she came out, pale and trembling, I asked directly, "Are you pregnant, honey?" Her eyes widened in panic, and she denied vehemently, almost hysterically. "No, I'm not. How can you think that, Mom?" And she ran back to the room, slamming the door. But I knew. Somehow, I knew. I confronted Lawrence that night when he returned from the office. "What's happening at that ranch? Why does our daughter always come back like this? Is she pregnant, Lawrence?" His reaction scared me. Instead of denying or showing surprise, he remained calm, calmly furious, like a contained storm. "You've always been too simple to understand certain things, Willa May. There are traditions in great families that people like you, of humble origin, don't understand." "Traditions?" I repeated, incredulous. "What traditions involve letting a teenager get pregnant?" He approached, gripping my arms tightly. "Don't speak of what you don't know. My mother is taking care of everything. Melissa is helping to preserve the Mercer lineage. It's an honor." I felt the ground disappear beneath my feet. The puzzle pieces began to fit together, forming a monstrous image that my brain refused to accept. You and your mother. "What have you done to our daughter?" Lawrence didn't answer directly. but his silence said everything. Then, with a coldness that chilled me to the bone, he said, "If you try to interfere, I'll take Melissa from you permanently. I have enough influence to get full custody. Think about that." That night, I locked myself in the bathroom and cried until I had no more tears. The man I loved, the father of my daughter, had revealed himself to be a monster. And I, blinded by love and dependency, had allowed it to happen. In the months that followed, I lived in a constant state of alert. I observed Melissa, noticing how her body subtly changed. She wore loose clothes, avoided looking at her own reflection. When I tried to take her to a doctor, Lawrence interfered, saying the family had a trusted doctor who would visit her at home. This doctor, Dr. Ulysses, came regularly. He would enter Melissa's room, close the door, and leave after some time without addressing me. When I asked Melissa about the consultations, she averted her gaze. "It's just a checkup, Mom. Nothing important." In January, I noticed that Melissa's belly had disappeared. She spent an entire week in her room with a high fever, according to Lawrence. When I finally saw her, she was even paler, more fragile. There was a sadness in her eyes that seemed bottomless. "What happened, my daughter?" I asked, sitting beside her bed. "I lost the baby," she whispered, no emotion in her voice. It was better that way. I remained silent, holding her hand, sharing a pain we couldn't name. After a long time, I asked, "Was it the first?" She just shook her head negatively, silent tears running down her young face, marked by suffering. The following winter, the story repeated itself. Lawrence announced it was time for Melissa to return to the ranch. This time, I was prepared. I had hidden money, important documents, planned an escape. But the night before the scheduled departure, I found Melissa in the backyard, looking at the starry sky. "You don't need to risk yourself for me, Mom," she said, without taking her eyes off the stars. "I only have one more year of this. When I turn 18, I'll leave here, far away, where neither he nor grandmother can find me. We can go together," I offered. "Right now, I have money saved." She finally looked at me with a sad smile that broke my heart. "If we run away, they will never stop looking for us. Lawrence has contacts everywhere. You know that. One more year, Mom. I can endure one more year." That night, I hugged my daughter while she cried herself to sleep. I felt her fragility, her courage, her resignation, and I hated Lawrence with every cell in my body. I hated Mrs. Sylvia, who had transformed her own granddaughter into... I couldn't even complete the thought. Melissa left the next day. Before getting into the car, she hugged me tightly and whispered, "Whatever happens, remember it wasn't your fault. You tried to protect me." Those words kept hammering in my head for the next 3 months. When she returned, at the end of winter, the same story repeated itself. The thinner body, the emptier eyes, the longer silences, and a few months later, the illness that kept her confined to her room for days. Liberation, when it came, wasn't as I had imagined. I couldn't save my daughter. It was fate, with its cruel irony, that finally intervened. In December 1992, we received the news that would change everything. Mrs. Sylvia had suffered a massive stroke. She died alone, at the ranch, with only the company of the caretaker and her housekeeper, Nadia. It was Lawrence who told me, his face pale, his eyes red, not from tears, but from something that looked like panic. "We need to go to the ranch immediately," he said, throwing clothes into a suitcase. "We have to organize everything before the funeral." Melissa, who had turned 17, was in the living room when we received the news. Her face showed no emotion. She just turned even paler, if that was possible. When Lawrence said we would all go to the ranch, she stood up with a start. "I'm not going," she declared, with a firmness she had never shown before. "I will never set foot in that place again." Lawrence turned to her, furious. "Yes, you are. Your grandmother died. We have obligations." Melissa began to tremble, first her hands, then her entire body. Suddenly, she fell to her knees, hugging herself, rocking back and forth like a small child. A scream came from her throat, a primitive sound of pain that chilled me to the bone. I ran to hug her while Lawrence watched the scene, divided between anger and concern with appearances. "Take her to the room," he ordered. "Give her a sedative. We have to leave in 2 hours." I helped Melissa stand up and took her to the room. I sat her on the bed and knelt in front of her, holding her cold hands. "Honey, you don't have to go if you don't want to. You can stay with Aunt Ellie." My sister had moved to Richmond a few years ago and always visited us. "You don't understand, Mom," she whispered, her gaze fixed on a point beyond me. "That place, the things that happened there." Her voice failed. "If I go back, I think I'll die. Literally, die." I felt a determination grow inside me, firm as the rocks of Bristol. "Then you're not going, I promise you." I left the room and found Lawrence finishing packing the suitcase. "Melissa is not going," I announced. "She's in shock. I'm going to call Ellie to stay with her." I expected an explosion, but Lawrence just looked at me, calculating. "Maybe it's better that way," he agreed after a moment. "We don't want a scandal at the funeral. You and I will go, take care of everything, and come back." That too easy agreement alerted me. Lawrence never gave in, especially when it came to Melissa and the ranch. Something was wrong. I called Ellie, who promised to come immediately. When I arrived, Melissa was sleeping, or pretending to sleep. I kissed her forehead and whispered, "I'm going to find out what happened to you, my daughter, and I will get justice." The trip to the ranch was silent. Lawrence drove tense, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Several times I caught him watching me from the corner of his eye, as if evaluating something. The ranch, when we arrived, seemed darker than I remembered. The large stone house, surrounded by century-old trees, had an air of medieval fortress. Mr. Theodore received us at the gate, hat in hand, as a sign of respect. "My condolences, Doctor," he murmured to Lawrence. Then he looked at me and quickly averted his gaze, as if he carried some guilt. Nadia, the housekeeper, was on the porch. A thin woman, with gray hair and a severe look. "The body has already been taken to the funeral home in Charlottesville," she informed, in a practical tone. "The ceremony will be tomorrow morning." We entered the house, and the feeling of oppression only increased. It was an old construction, with dark corridors and many doors. We had never slept there. In the few visits we made, Lawrence insisted on returning the same day. Melissa stayed at the ranch, but we never spent the night. Now I understood why. "You will stay in the guest room," said Nadia, guiding us through a corridor. "I'll prepare some tea." The room was simple, with a double bed, an old wardrobe, and a small window that overlooked the back garden. Lawrence put the suitcase on the floor and announced, "I'm going to check some documents in my mother's office. Rest a bit." I stayed alone in the room, feeling the weight of that place. Every corner seemed to hide secrets. Every shadow seemed to contain a whisper. I opened the window, needing air, and looked outside. The garden ended in a small stone construction that looked like a life-sized dollhouse. Something about that structure caught my attention, awakened a vague memory. The special room, I suddenly remembered. Once, Melissa, still small, had mentioned a special room at the ranch where grandmother took her. When I asked Lawrence, he said it was just a playroom that his mother had decorated for her granddaughter. A sudden urgency made me want to see that place. I left the room silently, went down the stairs, and crossed the kitchen. Nadia was busy preparing tea, her back to me. I slipped through the back door and quickly crossed the garden. The small house was locked, but under a flower pot I found a key, a typical country hiding place. With trembling hands, I opened the door. What I saw inside made me stagger. It wasn't a playroom. It was an improvised hospital room. A home birthing bed, cabinets with medical equipment, medicine bottles, and, most disturbing, on the walls, 5 framed photographs of newborns, each with a date handwritten in the bottom corner. My stomach turned. The dates coincided perfectly with the winters Melissa had been at the ranch, starting when she was 13. I opened one of the cabinets and found notebooks, detailed medical records written in Mrs. Sylvia's elegant handwriting. I leafed through one, tears blurring my vision. "Third cycle successfully completed," said one note. "Healthy boy 7 lbs, forwarded for adoption as agreed, deposit made." I let the notebook fall, feeling dizzy. It wasn't just abuse, it was an elaborate scheme, planned, executed year after year. Melissa wasn't just a victim, she was a prisoner, used as... I couldn't even complete the thought without feeling nauseous. I heard footsteps approaching and quickly hid the notebooks inside my blouse. Through the window, I saw Lawrence walking towards the small house, his face contorted with fury. There was no escape. I took a deep breath and decided to face the truth once and for all. The door opened violently. Lawrence entered, his eyes bloodshot. "What are you doing here?" he growled. "Discovering the truth," I replied, surprised at the firmness in my own voice. "What you and your mother did to our daughter, Lawrence. Turned her into a... breeder. For what? Money?" He closed the door behind him, locking it. "You don't understand. You never would. It's a matter of lineage, of blood. My mother discovered she couldn't have more children after me, but she was obsessed with perpetuating the Mercer blood. When she saw that Melissa had the same green eyes as the family..." "She was a child," I shouted, horror consuming me. "Your daughter, our daughter." "That's why we brought her to the ranch," he continued, as if he didn't hear me. "Here, nobody asked questions. Dr. Ulysses took care of everything, from insemination to delivery. The babies went to selected families, rich, influential, willing to pay well for an heir with green eyes and good blood." I felt my whole body tremble. "Insemination?" I repeated, a spark of hope that at least he hadn't. The smile he gave destroyed that hope. "In the beginning, yes. But then my mother insisted it would be more efficient. If I personally ensured the continuation of the lineage. After all, that way it would be pure Mercer blood." At that moment, something broke inside me. I don't know if it was the shock, the pain, or the anger accumulated over years, but I felt a wave of strength invade me. I lunged at him, the notebooks falling from my blouse. "Monster! You're a monster! Your own daughter!" He backed away, surprised by my reaction. "It was for a greater good, Willa May. And now that my mother is gone, we need to continue. The plan..." "What plan?" I asked, backing up to the small table where I had seen medical scissors. "Melissa is still young. She can continue. Now it will be just the 3 of us, without external interference. I already have interested buyers for the next..." I didn't let him finish. With a quick movement, I grabbed the scissors and pointed them at him. "You will never get near my daughter again." "Never!" He laughed, that arrogant laugh he always used when he thought I was foolish or naive. "And what are you going to do, Willa May? Report me? With what evidence? I'm a respected lawyer. You're just a seamstress from the country. Who will they believe?" Slowly, without taking my eyes off him, I bent down and picked up the notebooks. "These are enough evidence, and I'm sure there's more in the house. Your mother seemed too meticulous not to document everything." Something passed through his eyes. Fear, perhaps for the first time. "You won't be able to leave here with that." "I will," I affirmed, the scissors still pointed at him. "And I'll take our daughter far away from you. And then I'll destroy your life, just as you destroyed hers." He advanced, trying to grab me. I backed away, the scissors between us like a fragile barrier. "You know what will happen if you hurt me?" I asked, as he cornered me against the wall. "Everyone will know. Not just about what you did to Melissa, but about the babies, about the money, about everything." That made him stop. Lawrence always cared about appearances, about his reputation. The idea of a public scandal was his greatest fear. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice low, calculating. I want to leave here with these notebooks. I want to take my daughter and disappear from your life, and I want you to never, ever try to find us. He backed away, his face a mask of contained hatred. You won't get far. You don't have money. You don't have influence. I have something more important, I replied, moving slowly towards the door, the notebooks pressed against my chest, the scissors still in my hand. I have the truth. That moment in the special room was like standing at the edge of a precipice. On one side, the abyss of fear that had accompanied me for years. On the other, an uncertain path, but one that offered liberation. I chose the unknown path. I left the small house with the notebooks pressed against my chest, the scissors hidden in my sleeve. Lawrence came right behind, his face a mask of cold calculation. As we crossed the garden, he kept his voice low, threatening. Think carefully about what you're doing, Willa May. You have nowhere to go. I entered the main house with a single idea in mind, to find more evidence. Instinctively, I headed to Mrs. Sylvia's room, where I had never entered before. It was an austere room, with an antique double bed, an imposing cherrywood wardrobe, and a desk in the corner. Lawrence tried to stop me, but I was faster. What do you expect to find there? He asked, crossing his arms at the door. My mother wasn't foolish enough to leave evidence around. I ignored him and began opening drawers. In the desk, I found correspondence organized in folders, letters from adoptive families, discreetly thanking for the arrangements. In a locked drawer that I forced open with the scissors, I discovered what I was looking for: a carved wooden box containing 5 birth certificates. In all of them, the mother's name was Melissa's. The father's name was blank. Along with the certificates, there were confidential adoption papers, skillfully falsified, and bank statements showing large deposits in offshore accounts after each delivery. My stomach turned, seeing the values. Each baby had yielded a small fortune. Lawrence observed my discovery with an expression difficult to decipher. It wasn't exactly fear, nor anger, but something like resignation. And now, are you going to report me to the police? Do you really think anyone will believe your story against mine? I don't need them to believe me, I replied, placing the certificates and statements with the notebooks. These documents speak for themselves. DNA doesn't lie, Lawrence. And I'm sure that forensic doctors will be able to prove that you are the father of these children. That hit him like a punch. The arrogance on his face faltered, replaced by genuine panic. What do you want? He asked again, now with a trembling voice. I already said, I want to leave here with my daughter and disappear. I want you to never come near us again. And the documents? They come with me as a guarantee. If you try to find us, if you try to do anything against us, all of this will end up in the hands of the police, the newspapers, all your important clients. He took a step in my direction, threatening. I can simply take those papers right now. I backed up to the window. You can try, but I've already made copies. I sent them to trusted people with instructions to hand them to the authorities if anything happens to me or Melissa. It was a lie, of course. I hadn't had time to make copies. But it worked. I saw the calculation in his eyes, the risk assessment. You were never this clever, he murmured, more to himself than to me. Pain teaches us a lot, Lawrence, and you caused me enough pain for a lifetime. At that moment, we heard a car arriving. Through the window, I saw Dr. Ulysses parking his beige Oldsmobile. Lawrence also saw and turned pale. He can't find you with those documents. Then let me go, I demanded, putting everything inside a bag I found in the wardrobe. Now. He hesitated, divided between the fear of letting me leave with the evidence and the terror of a confrontation in front of the complicit doctor. Finally, he stepped away from the door. Go. But this isn't over, Willa May. I quickly left the room, went down the stairs, and found Nadia in the living room. I need to return to Richmond immediately, I said, trying to control the tremor in my voice. My daughter isn't well. The housekeeper looked at me with suspicion, but nodded. Mr. Theodore can take you to the bus stop. That won't be necessary, intervened Lawrence, coming down the stairs. I'll take my wife myself. I'll be back today for the funeral. The journey to the bus stop was the tensest of my life. Lawrence drove in silence, his knuckles white from gripping the steering wheel. I kept the bag with the documents pressed against my chest, the scissors still hidden in my sleeve, ready to defend myself if necessary. When we reached the stop, on the main road, he finally spoke. You won't be able to hide forever. I don't intend to hide, I replied, opening the door. I intend to live, something you never allowed Melissa to do. Before closing the door, I looked him in the eyes, those green eyes that once enchanted me and now caused only repulsion. Goodbye, Lawrence. I hope to never see you again. He sped off with the car before I even finished closing the door, raising dust on the dirt road. I stood there, alone at the deserted bus stop, holding my macabre treasure, the evidence of years of horror. The bus to Richmond would only pass in 2 hours. I decided to walk to the town of Charlottesville, about 3 miles from there. Each step took me away from the nightmare and closer to liberation. In Charlottesville, I went to the first sheriff's office I found. The sheriff, a middle-aged man named Thomas Caldwell, listened to my story with an expression that gradually changed from skepticism to horror as I showed him the documents. Ma'am, these are very serious accusations, he said, after examining the certificates and notebooks. We'll need statements, witnesses. My daughter is the main witness, I replied. And I'm sure that Dr. Ulysses, the doctor involved, will cooperate when he realizes he could be arrested as an accomplice. The sheriff made some calls and, to my surprise, acted quickly. Perhaps it was the horrifying nature of the case. Perhaps it was the fact that the Mercers, despite being influential in Richmond, didn't have the same power in Charlottesville. In a few hours, a police team was sent to the ranch to seize more documents and interrogate Mr. Theodore and Nadia. I called Ellie in Richmond, using the phone at the sheriff's office. Take Melissa and go to your house, I instructed. Don't let anyone in. I'm coming back, but it might take a while. What happened, Willamette? Asked my sister, concerned. I'll explain when I get there. Just keep Melissa safe. I spent the night at the Charlottesville Sheriff's Office, giving a formal statement, handing over all the documents which were duly registered and copied. Early in the morning, Sheriff Caldwell informed me that Lawrence had been detained for questioning. He tried to flee when our men arrived at the ranch, he explained. That only worsened his situation. I returned to Richmond that afternoon, escorted by a female police officer. My heart raced on the way. How would Melissa react? Would she forgive me for not realizing sooner, for not acting earlier? I found my daughter at Ellie's apartment. When she saw me, she ran into my arms as she did when she was little, before the seasons began. We hugged in silence, tears saying what words couldn't express. Is it over? She finally asked, her voice small, almost childlike. Yes, my daughter, it's over. He will never hurt you again. In the days that followed, the case took on proportions I never imagined. The press began to speculate about the arrest of the renowned lawyer, though initially without mentioning the most sordid details. The law firm where Lawrence worked quickly distanced itself from him, issuing a statement saying it was unaware of any illicit activities of its former associate. Dr. Ulysses, as I had predicted, began to cooperate with the investigations in exchange for a judicial agreement. His testimony confirmed everything, the forced inseminations in the early years, later replaced by, I can't even write it. He confirmed the 5 births, the illegal adoptions, the payments. Nadia also spoke, revealing that she knew everything, but kept quiet out of fear and for the generous retirement that Mrs. Sylvia had promised. Mr. Theodore swore he only took care of the exterior part of the ranch, never what happened inside the house or the special room, but admitted having suspected that something strange was happening with the girl. Melissa had to testify, which was the hardest part of the whole process. Holding her hand, I heard her tell, with a monotone voice and distant gaze, the horrors she had lived since she was 13. How Mrs. Sylvia convinced her that it was her family duty to continue the lineage. How Lawrence, initially reluctant according to himself, ended up giving in to his mother's insistence. How the babies were taken from her right after birth, without her even being able to see them. I gave them names, in secret, confessed Melissa, in a moment that broke my heart. Names that only existed in my head. It was the only thing they couldn't take from me. Lawrence was formally charged with rape, incest, child trafficking, and document forgery. The investigation extended to find the families who had adopted the babies, which proved to be a complex task, as the records used only codes to identify them. Amidst all this, Melissa and I had to rebuild our lives. We left the apartment where we had lived with Lawrence and moved temporarily to Ellie's house. The scandal followed us everywhere. Reporters at the door, neighbors whispering, looks of morbid curiosity. "We need to leave here," said Melissa one night as we sat on Ellie's small porch. "Start over somewhere where no one knows us." I agreed immediately. "Where do you want to go?" She remained silent for a moment, looking at the starry sky. "Remember that town you always talked about, where you grew up? With the river and the mountains?" "Bristol?" I asked, surprised. "No," she shook her head. "The other one, the one near the river with your name." "Shenandoah," I replied, feeling a wave of emotion. I had told stories about that region to Melissa when she was little, about the river that shared my name, about the mountains and the clean air. "Yes, Shenandoah," she confirmed, with the first genuine smile I had seen on her face in years. "Can we go there? Start over?" At that moment, I felt that healing, slow, difficult, but possible, was beginning. "Yes, my daughter. Let's go to Shenandoah." And so, while the case against Lawrence followed its course, we began to plan our new life, away from the shadows of the past, in search of a light we thought we had lost forever. Our arrival in Shenandoah Valley, in February 1993, was like a rebirth. We chose this small Virginia town for two reasons. First, because it was far enough from Richmond to give us the feeling of a new beginning. Second, because I always felt a special connection to the place that carried my name. The Shenandoah River cuts through the region like a vein of life, just as the story we lived cut through us and then brought us back to life. We rented a simple little house in the upper part of town with a view of the river. It was small, but had a generous yard where I soon began to plant my first flowers and herbs. Melissa, still so fragile, would spend hours sitting on the porch, looking at the mountainous horizon as if seeking something beyond those blue ridges. The money we had was little, some savings I had kept from the years of working with sewing in Richmond before the seasons began. But that didn't scare us. We were together, we were safe, and that was all that mattered. I started sewing again, now in our living room transformed into an improvised atelier. My old sewing machine, the one my mother had given me so many years ago, had accompanied us on this journey like a faithful friend. In the beginning, I accepted small repairs, pant hems, dress adjustments. Gradually, word spread that there was a skilled seamstress in town, and the orders began to increase. Melissa, little by little, came out of the cocoon of silence she had wrapped herself in. At 18, she decided she wanted to study. "I want to be a social worker, Mom," she told me one morning, with a determination that filled me with pride. "I want to help other girls like me." I supported her with all my heart. She began studying at home, preparing for college. Her intelligence, which had always been remarkable even in the darkest times, now flourished freely. When she was accepted at the college in Harrisonburg, I cried with joy. She would make the journey daily, an hour by bus each way, but she insisted it was worth it. "I don't want to live far from you, Mom," she explained, and I understood the implicit fear in those words, the fear of being alone, vulnerable again. Meanwhile, the case against Lawrence followed its course. We were called to Richmond several times for additional testimonies, for recognition of evidence. Each trip was an emotional ordeal, but Melissa faced everything with a courage that left me speechless. "It's what I need to do to make sure he never hurts anyone again," she would say. In 1995, the sentence came. Lawrence was convicted to 30 years in prison without the right to parole. The news brought us a strange mixture of relief and sadness, not for the man who had ruined our lives, but for the family we could have been if he had been different. That same year, with the money from selling the apartment in Richmond, which legally belonged to me in part, I managed to buy our little house in Shenandoah. It was our first concrete achievement, our little piece of land where we could put down real roots. Time passed, healing wounds gradually. Melissa graduated and began working at the Center for Reference in Social Assistance in Shenandoah. Her work with women and children victims of violence was more than a profession. It was a mission. Each person she helped seemed to heal a piece of herself. In 1998, a young history professor arrived in town. Benjamin Parker, with his thin-framed glasses and gentle smile, began frequenting the town library at the same time as Melissa. Books brought them together. Then came conversations about literature, about history, about dreams. I saw my daughter smile genuinely for the first time in years. "He knows everything, Mom," Melissa told me one night after dating Benjamin for 6 months. "I told him about the ranch, about everything, and he didn't run away." Their wedding in 2000 was simple and emotional. We held the ceremony in the garden of our house, which by that time was full of the flowers I cultivated with so much care. Melissa wore a dress that I sewed with my own hands, putting in each stitch all the love I felt for her. The following year came the news that made us both fear and celebrate at the same time. Melissa was pregnant. The initial fear, the ghosts of the past that insisted on haunting us, was replaced by joy when Lucy was born, bringing a new light to our family. Seeing my daughter cradle her own daughter, with so much love and protection, was one of the most healing moments of my life. Then came Hannah and Jake, completing the family that Melissa built with Benjamin. A family based on respect, affection, and mutual protection. Everything that had been lacking in our past. Meanwhile, my life was also transforming. My small sewing business prospered, and over time, I began teaching young women in town. I found in crochet a form of therapy. Each stitch was like an organized thought, each finished piece a small victory over the chaos of the past. Today, at 72, I live a life I never imagined possible during those years of darkness. My house, always full of the laughter of my grandchildren, has become a safe harbor not only for my family, but for many women in town who seek advice, consolation, or simply a cup of tea and a welcoming conversation. My plants, especially my orchids, are my pride and joy. Caring for them has taught me about patience and resilience, how something so delicate can be, at the same time, so strong and determined to bloom even in the most adverse conditions. Melissa, now 50, directs the social services in town and is respected throughout the region for her work with victims of domestic violence. Benjamin became the principal of the local school, and together they are a force for positive change in Shenandoah. And what about the 5 babies we never knew? The investigations managed to locate 3 of them. 2, already adults, chose not to make contact. We respect their decision, though always leaving the door open for when and if they are ready. The 3rd, a young woman named Cecilia, entered our lives 8 years ago. The reunion was painful, confusing, but also deeply healing. Today she is part of our family, bringing with her her 2 small children who call Melissa Grandma, a sweet irony of fate. When I look back at the long road we've traveled, I feel a mixture of pain and gratitude. Pain for what we lost, for what was stolen from us. Gratitude for the strength we discovered, for the bonds we formed, for the life we managed to rebuild from the ashes of our past. My dear ones who have come this far with me, I want to leave with you some words I've been keeping in my heart, Words that helped me through the darkest moments and that I hope can illuminate the path for those who need it. If you are going through a situation of abuse, know that you are not alone. I know well what it's like to feel trapped, powerless, with no way out. I know how difficult it is to recognize that someone who should protect you is hurting you. But believe me when I say, there is a way out of this darkness. I learned that age doesn't define our strength, but rather our ability to start anew each day. When I left Richmond at 40, with a traumatized daughter and just some savings in my pocket, many would say it was too late to rebuild a life. But I discovered it's never too late to seek freedom and dignity. My wrinkles are maps of survival. Each one tells a story of pain overcome. Each line on my face represents not just suffering, but also the strength I found to protect my daughter, to denounce the abuse, to start over in a new town. Life taught me that even in the deepest darkness, our inner light never goes out. Even in the moments when everything seemed lost, when the truth about the seasons came to light, something inside me still shone. The determination to seek justice, to protect my daughter, to find a path to healing. Time doesn't heal all wounds, but it teaches us to live with them and still smile. Melissa will forever carry the scars of what she lived through, just as I will carry the pain of not having realized sooner what was happening. But we learn to build a beautiful life around these scars, transforming our pain into strength to help others. My story is not about what they did to me and my daughter, but about how we chose to respond. We could have drowned in bitterness and anger, and there were days when we almost gave in to these feelings. But we chose, day after day, hour after hour, to transform our experience into something that could bring light to other people. If you know someone who is going through situations of abuse, be it a child, a teenager, or an adult, don't turn a blind eye. Often, the victim cannot ask for help directly. Be attentive to the signs: changes in behavior, isolation, unexplained sadness, excessive fear. Your intervention can save a life, an entire family. In any country, in any culture, there are resources and people willing to help. Seek information about protection organizations in your region. Remember that human dignity is a universal value, and we all deserve to live free from violence and abuse. I learned that true strength is not in never falling, but in getting up every time. Each small victory, be it returning to sewing, seeing Melissa smile again, or simply being able to sleep a whole night without nightmares, was a step in our healing journey. I discovered that we are stronger than we imagine, especially when we think we can't take it anymore. It's in the most difficult moments that we discover internal resources we didn't even know we had. My dear ones, before I say goodbye, I want to make a special request. Please, subscribe to the Grandparents' Tales channel and turn on the notification bell right now. Each new subscription is like a light that turns on against the darkness of silence that protects abusers. When you subscribe, you're saying, I care about these stories. I care about these women. Share this video immediately with someone you think needs to hear this message. Maybe it's a person who is suffering in silence. Maybe it's someone who suspects something is wrong in the life of a loved one. Your sharing could be the spark of hope someone needs to find courage and seek help. And leave in the comments the word mother so I know who really watched until the end and received this message in their heart. Do it now. Don't wait even one more minute. Your action can break the chains of silence that keep so many victims trapped in situations of abuse.